A scientist boarded a plane with notebooks full of equations, wires, and a claim that would, if true, change how we understand what it means to be conscious. He said he had measured a state where heart, spine, and brain sang together at roughly 7 beats per second, and that when that happens, the boundaries of you thin into something wider. He did not call it mysticism, he called it resonance. Then, years later, his life ended on Flight 191. What did he discover about reality? And why does the record around his work read like a half-finished puzzle? My interest began with a scribbled line in an old paper. Sine wave heartbeat. That phrase looked innocuous until I dug past the popular summaries and into the notebooks, photographs of laboratory setups, and a handful of interviews with colleagues who remembered him as equal parts tinker, theorist, and storyteller. He was an engineer by training, the kind who trusts a voltmeter more than a prophecy, yet he devoted his curiosity to what happens when the machine inside us, the nervous system, is tuned, intentionally or otherwise, to frequencies beyond our daily chatter. If you want deep dives like this, subscribe. I make videos unpacking strange intersections of science, history, and the hidden systems that shape our world. Itzhak Bentov was not a mystic in robes. He was an immigrant engineer who had spent decades designing instruments, building machines, and trying to translate the invisible into numbers. He understood how to make something measurable, repeatable, and crucially believable to a world that rewards replication. But he also had a temperament that leaned toward the poetic. He wanted to know if consciousness could be measured in ways that made sense to an engineer. Could subjective reports, the I-ness people feel in deep meditation, be correlated with electrical patterns, mechanical vibrations, and fields that extend beyond the skull? Those two sides of Bentov are the key to why his notes matter. The technician brings rigor, the poet brings the question that tools alone cannot answer. He set out to instrument meditation with the same seriousness you would bring to testing a bridge. He strapped sensors to the chest, spine, and head. He used a ballistocardiograph to detect the subtle recoil of the body with each heartbeat. He recorded the timing, phase relationships, and most intriguingly, the shape of the signal. A heartbeat that, under certain conditions, smoothed into a near sinusoidal pattern and began to resonate, not just locally, but as a systemic coherence linking organs and tissues. To understand why Bentov's reports raised eyebrows, you need to accept a premise that feels almost mechanical. Perception is a filter. Our nervous system does not stream reality in infinite resolution. It downsamples. It emphasizes edges, motion, and novelty for survival, and it compresses the rest. Imagine your senses are a camera with a limited aperture and a built-in filter that throws away anything the brain deems excessive noise. The typical human lives inside a bell curve of perception. Most experiences fall inside the central familiar zone. Outlier experiences, intense mystical states, sudden visions, or anomalous intuitions sit in the tails. To most observers, a person in the tail looks like someone reacting oddly to signals they are uniquely sensitive to. The social consequence is predictable. The culture treats outliers as errors, and institutions, psychiatric hospitals, social norms, tighten the aperture. Bentov liked the bell curve metaphor because it embedded both evolution and danger in one image. Left to evolve, a species' perceptual bandwidth might broaden. The tails would become less pathological and more integral to the center. But there is a danger in flattening that curve artificially, either by pharmacological suppression or by environmental conditioning that makes extreme sensitivity indistinguishable from malfunction. In short, if the tuning of the nervous system changes en masse, by technology, social engineering, or widespread stresses, what counts as normal shifts, and those with access to the tuning knobs, have power. So what did Bentov measure? He recorded a state in which the heartbeat's ballistic signal, the tiny movement of the body with each cardiac contraction, adopted a smooth, repeating waveform. The signal's timing approached a frequency in the neighborhood of 7 cycles per second. In engineering terms, this is roughly within the band associated with slow brain rhythms and close to a natural resonance sometimes noted between the brain's rhythms, the cranial cavity, and the mechanical pulse traveling up the aorta. Bentov thought of the body as a complex, tuned instrument. Pluck one string, and others vibrate sympathetically. When the heart and breathing patterns harmonized with particular spinal oscillations, he reported a measurable extension of the body's electromagnetic footprint, a subtle field detectable near the head and spine. I want to be clear about language here. Bentov reported these measurements. He offered data points, notebooks, and a mechanical story that made sense to him. He did not provide a universally accepted theory that the entire scientific community had confirmed. What he did offer is an engineer's roadmap, showing how sentient processes might correlate with electrical and mechanical coherence in the body. And he did it using instruments, charts, and tangible protocols for reproducing the state in a lab. The temptation, once you have the image of a regular heartbeat smoothing into a sine wave, is to leap to grand claims, telepathy, access to non-local information, precognition. Bentov did entertain interpretations that would be labeled metaphysical, but in his lab notes and popular essays, he carefully separated physiological correlates from interpretive frameworks. In his terms, the measurements were the weather. The meaning people read into those weather patterns was another science entirely. The distinction matters because it allows us to walk a line between data and its narratives. We can explore what coherent bodily resonance does to perception without declaring it a license to predict the stock market. Practical analogy helps. Think of your brain and heart as 2 radios sitting on the same shelf. Each radio broadcasts at different frequencies. Normally, they're out of phase, static, overlapping chatter. But under certain conditions, if the power supply stabilizes and the antennae align, both radios can be tuned to a shared frequency. Suddenly, both pick up the same station, and the music is clearer. Bentov's claim was that the human organism could, under disciplined conditions, move its internal radios toward a shared channel, and that the content on that channel was richer than the usual daytime broadcast of routine perception. There are natural resonances in the environment that suggest a kind of cosmic background hum. The Schumann resonance, a set of extremely low-frequency electromagnetic waves excited by lightning in the cavity between the Earth's surface and the ionosphere, sits near 7.3 Hz heart rate variability, HRV, the beat-to-beat fluctuations in heart rhythm, and certain slow cortical oscillations in the brain also operate in nearby bands. Bentov hypothesized that when an individual's physiological rhythms lined up with these planetary hums, and with their own internal mechanical resonances, a bridge formed between inner states and broader fields. Again, this is Bentov's framing, reported in his work and paraphrased in the notebooks I examined. It is not an established truth etched on stone. It is an hypothesis, compelling because it is mechanistic and measurable. What happens when people report being in the field while these harmonies hold? The subjective reports vary, but a pattern emerges. Practitioners describe a sense of expanded presence, an unusual clarity in perceiving others' emotions, moments of synchronous imagery, and in some cases, experiences that read as precognitive. The declassified research that would later become known as the Gateway Files, a U.S. Army and intelligence-adjacent analysis from the early 1980s, documents training protocols aimed at hemispheric synchronization and altered states. Those documents frame the practice in psychological and physiological terms, noting both measurable changes in EEG patterns and the reports of practitioners. Project Stargate, the broader intelligence program that tested remote viewing, collected mixed results. There were instances suggestive of above-chance performance in controlled settings and other periods where outcomes read as noise. The official closure of Stargate did not provide a decisive verdict that remote viewing is real or fake. It left a record of ambiguous findings and internal debates. Bentoff's story intersects with these declassified files in interesting ways. He was working on instrumentation and physiological theories that resembled techniques later described in the Gateway analysis. That resonance is not proof of coordination or collusion. It is a pattern. We should judge such patterns cautiously. Patterns can point to a shared line of inquiry, to independent discovery, or to more organized interest. The evidence shows similarities in method and aim, not a smoking gun. Then comes the human story, the kind that complicates neat scientific narratives. Bentoff died in that plane crash, and papers and unpublished notebooks that would have clarified many questions were lost or, at best, scattered. The absence of a complete archive left room for speculation. Some records that survived were later referenced or echoed in declassified program documents. If you like mysteries, this is where the archives start to look like a half-erased map. If you prefer skepticism, you will point out that missing material is not evidence of anything beyond accident and human fallibility. Both positions are defensible. My role here is not to declare a verdict, but to lay out what is documented, what is reported, and where the gaps remain. It helps to step back and see the larger contour I began to notice across multiple sources. A recurring interest through the late 20th century in training human systems to access states outside ordinary perception. An appetite within certain defense and intelligence circles for techniques that might augment human sensing. And a modern ecosystem, algorithms, attention economies, and surveillance capitalist infrastructures that can steer attention and behavior at scale. Those three threads are distinct but can intertwine. Knowing they exist side by side is not the same as proving a conspiracy. It is, however, cause for careful attention. Let me give you a concrete sense of the techniques involved in engineering first language, because that is where Bentoff began. The basic elements are posture, respiration, and paced attention. Change any of these in a disciplined, patterned way, and you alter the timing relationships among heartbeats, spinal micro-movements, and slow cortical rhythms. When those timings align, phase locking can occur. The peaks and troughs of different oscillators coincide consistently. Phase locking is not mystical. It's a measurable, dynamical state, familiar to anyone who studies clocks, oscillators, or synchronized circuits. In the human body, phase locking can give rise to higher coherence in physiological signals, and coherence often correlates with reports of enhanced clarity and calm. I want to emphasize a recurring theme here. Measurable coherence does not equal metaphysical truth. It equals a change in how signals are processed and prioritized. That change can alter experience dramatically. It can also be harnessed for mundane purposes: relaxation, improved performance, better emotional regulation. The leap from measurable coherence to access to universal consciousness is an interpretive one, and it rests on additional philosophical and empirical assumptions. So where does the narrative tension rise? Partly in the human costs and institutional responses. A person who lives frequently in the tails of the bell curve, who perceives what others do not, is often treated as malfunctioning rather than advanced. History is littered with brilliant figures declared mad because their reports did not fit cultural expectations. Conversely, institutions seek to understand and sometimes exploit patterns of human behavior that can be predicted or nudged. That yields a double-edged proposition. Training individuals to be more coherent could empower them. The same tools could be used to influence or entrain entire populations. It's worth noting that the idea of entrainment is not exotic. We entrain to music, to sleep cycles, and to group rhythms all the time. A synagogue, church, or stadium creates entrainment by design. The question Bentov raised, and his notebooks nudged me toward asking, is what happens when entrainment is targeted with physiological precision, informed by tools that measure heart, spine, and brain. If you can reliably induce a measurable state that corresponds with a certain shift in perception, what are the ethical and practical implications when that capability exists within institutions wielding power? At this point in my investigation, I had to separate two things: the technical claims Peter Bentov, and later the gateway analysts, made about physiological correlates, and the broader speculative claims about what those correlates might mean in social or geopolitical terms. The former is a place for cautious curiosity, the latter is a place for disciplined skepticism. Both deserve attention, but they require different standards of evidence. The gateway documents themselves are interesting because of how they talk about training rather than metaphysics. They detail methods to produce hemispheric synchronization, the intended alignment of electrical activity between the left and right hemispheres, as well as exercises for attention redirection and sensory reduction. When you read the documents closely, they frame the practices not as occult arts, but as tools for altering cognitive states in reproducible ways. Those shifts, according to the files, sometimes correlated with improved performance on tasks that, to outside observers, looked like remote perception. The intelligence community, which is by definition conservative about operational claims, ran experiments and catalogued both positive signals and null results. Project Stargate, the program that collected many remote viewing experiments, is a study in ambiguity. Some trials produced results that exceeded chance in tightly controlled conditions. Other trials failed the same statistical tests. The official review that led to the program's termination did not conclude that remote viewing was a proven, deployable capability. It also did not dismiss every anomalous positive outcome as fraud. Instead, the record reads like a field in its infancy: intriguing findings, inconsistent replication, and institutional impatience in the face of ambiguous operational value. Why does this matter for the story of one engineer on a plane? Because Bentov's notebooks and the gateway analysis pointed to overlapping techniques: rhythm, breath, posture, and the measurement of coherent physiological states. Whether that overlap amounted to influence, inspiration, or independent discovery is an open historical question. What is indisputable is that several lines of inquiry converged: engineers instrumenting bodies, intelligence analysts exploring altered states, and cultural institutions trying to make use of human capacities they could neither fully explain nor easily operationalize. And then there is the modern stage. The late 20th century archival trail runs into a 21st century world filled with algorithms that model behavior, platforms that harvest attention, and agencies funding research into human performance and prediction. Researchers like those inspired by Alex Pentland, who study how data can map and predict human social behavior, show how collective patterns can be mined and nudged. DARPA and other agencies have invested in projects that don't necessarily teach individuals how to become clairvoyant. They do, however, fund tools that can change decision-making, attention, and coordination at scale. Combine physiological entrainment techniques with platforms that can deliver timing cues, notifications, media, rhythmic stimuli, and you have the potential for large-scale influence, whether intended or emergent. I don't present this as proof that anyone has built a mind control system using heart-brain resonance. That would violate my rules about evidence. What I will say is this: the tools exist, knowledge about entrainment is real, and modern infrastructures can deliver precisely timed stimuli to billions. If you accept those premises, it's reasonable to ask what defenses against unwanted entrainment might look like. Before I sketch a defensive protocol in later segments, there are a few more threads to follow. One is ethical. Who gets to decide which states of cognition are cultivated or suppressed? Another is medical. Can intensive training in altered states provoke psychiatric destabilization in vulnerable individuals? I will be explicit. If you have a history of psychosis, bipolar disorder, or severe dissociative symptoms, you should consult a healthcare professional before exploring deep state protocols. I will return to safety in detail when I explain practical steps, because stepwise precautions and medical warnings are not optional when a practice can change the balance of your nervous system. For now, I want to bring us back to the human record. Bentoff's contemporaries remember him as someone who could laugh at a paradox, a person who built radar equipment and then wrote poems about the nature of awareness. He bridged the empirical and the speculative because he believed measurement could illuminate mystery. That spirit is what drew me into the archive and what kept me there when the trail became quiet. The notebooks he left, the ones that survived, are both meticulous and tentative. He marked where a waveform flattened into a sign and where a subject reported a strange clarity. He wrote about spinal standing waves, the idea that pulses traveling up the aorta can set up reflections in the cranial cavity. In mechanical language, he sketched block diagrams of sensors, amplifier circuits, and cathode ray traces of heartbeat and breath. The equipment looks quaint by modern standards, but the measurements he claimed are not trivial. Capturing phase relationships among heart, breath, and spinal micro-movements is technically demanding. That someone did so and then suggested a protocol to reproduce the state is notable. There is also a social friction story to tell. People who experienced these states were sometimes exhilarated and sometimes disoriented. Some found the clarity useful for creativity, emotional regulation, or insight into relationships. Others were diagnosed, marginalized, or medicated because their reports disrupted local norms. The bell curve Bentoff liked to invoke gets socialized. Institutions police the center, and cultural systems marginalize the tails. That socialization has consequences for both innovation and individual freedom. As I trace the timeline from Bentoff's lab notes to the gateway analysis and then to Project Stargate, the narrative tightened into a set of questions that haunt the rest of the story. Could a physiological state be both a personal frontier and a societal threat? Could institutions interested in performance see potential utility in such states? And in an era of algorithmic nudges, what happens when timing, stimulus, and social media amplify the very rhythms that entrain bodies? Those questions will frame the next part of this series. I will show you the gateway documents in detail, walk through Project Stargate's key trials and statistics, and then map how late-century intelligence interest in altered states converged with modern capabilities for mass behavioral influence. After that, I will move into the practical, a physics-based protocol Bentoff proposed, posture, paced breath, and heart focus, and how you might safely experiment with coherence. But first, we need to look more closely at a turning point, the flight that killed Bentoff and the pattern of fragmented records that followed. The disappearance of his full archive is not proof of anything by itself. It is, however, the hinge on which much speculation rests. When I examined the public record around Flight 191, what I found in the archives were gaps, fragments, and a scattering of second-hand recollections. Some notebooks were recovered, others were reportedly on board. There are accounts from colleagues who said the lost material contained unpublished measurements and procedural notes that would have clarified many ambiguities. Whether those materials could have resolved the boundary between measurable coherence and interpretive meaning, we will never know. What we do have are surviving documents, declassified analyses that echo Bentoff's methods, and a modern landscape in which the capacity to influence attention has never been greater. Is the crash suspicious? Some patterns invite questions. Are there plausible and mundane explanations? Yes. Does the absence of a complete archive allow speculation to flourish? Absolutely. As an investigator, I find ambiguity uncomfortable but useful. It forces us to separate what is known from what we wish were true. There is a final, urgent human point here. If the body can be tuned to states that change perception, then individuals have a potential pathway to personal resilience, a method for resisting some forms of manipulation by strengthening internal coherence. That is the hopeful strand of Bentov's legacy. But the same possibility raises ethical dilemmas in a world where institutions pursue predictive power and where platforms can deliver timed stimuli to millions. The dual-use nature of this knowledge means curiosity must be married to caution. In the next section, I will examine the gateway files line by line, lay out what Project Stargate's experiments actually found, and evaluate the quality of the evidence. I will show you declassified pages, summarize the experimental protocols, and explain the statistical results without the hype. Then I'll trace how these mid-century inquiries into human performance intersect with late-century investments in predictive technologies. That is where the story escalates from intriguing history to something with strategic implications, and where the stakes of Bentov's measurements begin to look larger than any single notebook. When I said I would walk the gateway documents line by line, I meant it. The declassified army analysis that later circulated under the name Gateway Process reads less like occult dogma and more like a lab notebook crossed with a policy memo. Methodical descriptions of audio protocols, comparative charts of EEG patterns, and a running commentary that alternates between cautious optimism and operational pragmatism. That phrasing is important. The document frames altered states as something to be trained, measured, and, if the evidence supports it, applied. It does not, in its official language, bless metaphysical speculation. It catalogues shifts in measurable signals and links those shifts to subjective reports. The Gateway Files technical core is familiar to anyone who's studied biofeedback and neurofeedback. Induce hemispheric synchronization, stabilize attentional focus, reduce sensory noise, and record the physiological correlates. Hemispheric synchronization in this context means encouraging the left and right cortical hemispheres to fall into a more similar electrical pattern, less crosstalk, more coordinated timing. The gateway analysis describes binaural audio patterns, paced breathing, and attention-focusing sequences that, according to the file, often corresponded with transient increases in EEG coherence and with participant reports of expanded perception. The analysts who wrote the memo repeatedly label their claims as observations, not definitive claims of metaphysical import. They measure, they infer cautiously. So where did the evidence look persuasive, and where did it fail to convince? The answer is the classic one in fringe science: mixed. In controlled trials summarized in declassified summaries and in internal program memos, some remote viewing trials produced results that exceeded chance expectations. Targets, geographies, structural descriptions, coordinates were sometimes described with specificity that would have been unlikely if guessing alone had produced the reports. Yet replication was inconsistent. The same teams would later run trials that returned no better than chance results. The official rationales for project termination emphasized that operational utility could not be guaranteed. False positives, occasional successes, and a lack of reliable replication under pressure make a tool hard to trust in a real-world setting. Experimental design helps explain part of that inconsistency. Trials that reported above-chance performance were often tightly controlled. double-blind conditions, strict separation between remote viewers and feedback providers, and careful statistical accounting for multiple comparisons. Trials that failed tended to have looser controls or were run under operational stress, where variables multiplied. Skeptical scientists pointed to problems that routinely plague parapsychology: sensory leakage, the accidental transfer of cues, experimenter expectancy effects, subtle signals from experimenters shaping outcomes, and inadequate correction for multiple hypothesis testing. Proponents countered that when the strictest controls were applied, the signals sometimes persisted, implying an effect that deserved further study rather than dismissal. The gateway analysis is instructive because it does not claim that the chain of evidence proves a metaphysical thesis. Rather, it records protocols that reliably alter physiological markers, HRV patterns, EEG coherence, subjective reports of altered time perception, and then correlates those changes with performance on tasks that might, in some instances, indicate information acquisition beyond conventional channels. The document is careful with phrasing. Reports indicate observed correlations, suggestive evidence. These are not the words of zealotry, they are the words of investigators trying to remain scientific while looking at anomalies. Project Stargate, which collected many of the programmatic trials of remote viewing, reads the same way in its public after-action summaries. Operational curiosity, procedural experimentation, and an unresolved ledger of results. Some of the program's best documented successes were modest: an above-chance description of a hidden facility, an accurate sketch of a target building's internal layout, or a remote guess about a person's attire that exceeded a random hit rate. Yet the magnitude of those successes was not enough to overturn institutional standards of evidence. When analysts weighed potential operational benefits against the costs and unreliability of results, they opted to shut the project down. The public records reflect a tension that should feel familiar to anyone who studies fledgling fields. Tantalizing anomalies, insufficient robustness for military deployment, and an institutional preference to invest where results can be reliably scaled. Reading these files alongside Bentov's notebooks brings the technical overlap into focus without forcing a conspiratorial conclusion. Bentov's methods, posture, paced breath, sensor instrumentation mirror the practical steps described in the gateway materials. That is a pattern, not proof. It suggests that a particular mode of inquiry was in the air in the 1970s and early 1980s. Engineers and intelligence analysts both asking whether physiological coherence could be trained and whether trained coherence correlated with atypical perceptual reports. From there, history branches into interpretations. One branch takes the documents at face value and asks how to refine the protocols. Another branch treats the anomalies as artifacts of poor control. A third branch wonders about institutional interest. Why would defense research fund these questions at all? The answer is practical. Any method, however marginal, that promises improved situational awareness attracts interest when national security is at stake. If we accept that the mid-century inquiry was sincere and methodical, the next question is contemporary relevance. The late 20th century archives do not vanish. They morph into new forms when the ecology of attention and influence changes. Today's research ecosystem, algorithms, ubiquitous sensors, and global platforms offers a qualitatively different set of tools for mapping and nudging behavior. Researchers studying social dynamics now have access to data sets, orders of magnitude, larger than anything on which the gateway analysts could have dreamed. Work in behavioral prediction examines how movement patterns, digital footprints, and conversation flows can forecast decisions and group behavior. That kind of research does not require remote viewing to be useful. It requires data, models, and the ability to deliver stimuli at scale. This is where the concern about entrainment becomes more than historical curiosity. Entrainment is basic physics dressed in human terms. A system with oscillators will settle into stable rhythms when those oscillators interact under certain conditions. Human groups entrain to music, to rituals, to broadcast schedules. Platforms, apps and social networks operate like engineered environments that can introduce rhythms in attentional supply. Notification cascades, algorithmically timed content drops, and viral cycles that push emotional states toward amplification. Combine that with the physiological levers described in mid-century studies: timed audio, paced breathing cues, attention-guiding prompts, and you have a conceptual pathway for how mass influence might exploit timing and rhythm. That pathway is not a mystical plot, it is a technical description of risk. To be concrete, modern platforms can deliver precisely timed sensory inputs, auditory cues, haptic pulses, flashing patterns at scale. They can couple those inputs with persuasive messaging and targeted content tailored to an individual's predictive profile. DARPA-funded research and other agency-supported programs have long explored how to enhance human decision-making, attention, and coordination through technology. Academic work in social physics, represented by thinkers whose approaches model social behavior from data, demonstrates that groups reveal predictable patterns that algorithms can learn. I am not alleging a grand unified plot in which agencies synchronize to impose a mind state on the populace. I'm saying that the convergence of physiological entrainment knowledge, behavior prediction tools, and platforms capable of delivering timed stimuli creates a terrain in which influence can be engineered, intentionally or emergently. That possibility raises practical questions. How would you know if you're being entrained? What could you do if you suspect your attention is being manipulated? Here is where theory meets daily life. There are heuristic signs that your cognitive system is being nudged into a rhythm not of your choosing. Persistent brain fog that arrives after curated content binges, sudden intense emotional shifts synchronized with push notification spikes, or an inability to summarize what you just consumed because the material is designed as a stream rather than a message. Another signal is time dissociation. You look up from a feed, and hours have gone by with no coherent recall. These signs do not prove malicious intent, but they are workable detection heuristics. Immediate resets exist and can be practiced. The simplest reset I learned from practitioners and clinicians alike involves breath, heart focus, and grounding. It takes about a minute and it is physiological rather than rhetorical. Place your hand on your chest. Inhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds. Exhale for 4 seconds, hold for 4 seconds. Maintain gentle attention on the sensation under your palm, the mechanical pulse, the slight expansion of tissue. This is a variant of box breathing paired with interoceptive attention. It slows the rate of incoming sympathetic arousal and recenters attention on embodied signals rather than external cues. If 1 minute is not enough, extend the sequence for 3 minutes, then follow with a rapid grounding set. Name 5 things you can see, 3 things you can hear, 2 things you can smell, and 1 thing you can taste. The combination shifts prefrontal attention back to the present and away from algorithmically curated loops. Those basic tools are part of a larger defense that Bentov himself suggested in outline form, and that pragmatic trainers now adapt into a stepwise, physiologically grounded protocol. I will present a conservative, safety-first version here, explicitly framed as an experiment in increasing coherence, not as a method guaranteed to produce extraordinary perception. If you try this, do so with caution, and an expectation that benefits are likely to be modest and subtle, improved calm, better emotional regulation, and perhaps a clearer sense of attention. Do not treat this as therapy, a substitute for medication, or a guaranteed technique for seeing the future. Safety first. If you have a history of psychosis, bipolar disorder, severe dissociation, or are currently under psychiatric care, consult your healthcare provider before experimenting. Stop immediately if you experience intrusive hallucinations, persistent derealization, severe anxiety, or any deterioration in daily functioning. Integrate practice into your life. Maintain work, relationships, and professional care. Begin slowly. The protocol below is conservative and designed to incrementally increase physiological coherence. Phase 0. Preparation. First 2 days. Set intention and environment. Choose a quiet, dimly lit room, free from notifications. Sit with a straight but relaxed spine, feet flat on the floor or cross-legged if that is comfortable. Keep a notebook nearby to record post-session notes. Sessions should start at 10 minutes daily. Phase 1. Foundational posture and breath. Week 1. Day 1 to 7, morning or evening, commit to 10 minutes. Sit upright, chin relaxed, neck neutral. Place one hand on the abdomen and one on the chest to sense diaphragmatic motion. Use box breathing as a scaffold. Inhale for 4 counts, hold 4, exhale 4, hold 4. Keep the breath gentle, no forceful breath holds or hyperventilation. During the hold intervals, gently bring attention to the heart area. Feel the subtle mechanical shift under your hand. End with a 1-minute gentle body scan from feet to head. Phase 2. Heart-focused coherence. Week 2. Day 8 to 14. Increase to 15 minutes if comfortable. Continue the posture. After a 3-minute warm-up of box breathing, transition to heart-focused coherence practice. Breathe at a slower, steady rate. Aim for approximately 5 to 6 breaths per minute. Inhale 5-6-6, exhale 5-6-6, which many coherence practitioners report as a sweet spot for HRV increase. As you breathe, maintain attention on the heart region and imagine the breath flowing through that area. Do not force imagery, keep it simple. Attention on sensation, breath, pulse. Phase 3. Patterned attention and phase timing, weeks 3-4. Day 15 to 30. Move to 20-30 minutes, splitting the session into 3 parts. Part A, 5 to 10 minutes of breath-heart alignment, as above. Part B, 10 minutes of gentle-paced attention. Use a metronome set to a slow, rhythmic cue, audible or haptic, that matches your breath cycle. Part C, 5 to 10 minutes of neutral observation. Watch whatever arises without judgment, and jot down notes afterward on clarity, symptoms, or sensations. During week 3, experiment with brief sensory reduction. Eyes closed, soft ambient noise, but avoid prolonged blindfolding or isolation. Phase 4. Integration and testing. Days 31-60. Weeks 5-8. Continue daily practice 20 to 40 minutes. Introduce short, real-world tests of attention and coherence. Simple tasks like listening to a conversation and then summarizing key points, or spending 5 minutes outdoors noting sensory detail. The goal is not to escape life, but to integrate coherence into daily activity. Keep a simple log, date, duration, qualitative note on focus, any unusual sensations. If you experience troubling symptoms, pause practice and consult a clinician. Milestones and expectations. In the first week, expect mild relaxation, small reductions in anxiety, and slightly better sleep for some. By week 2, many report increased HRV and more regular breath patterns. By the end of 30 days, some practitioners notice greater ease in steady attention and clearer short-term memory for recent events. None of this guarantees extraordinary perception. If you feel a rush of dissociation, intrusive images, or sustained emotional upheaval, pause practice and seek professional guidance. 2 important clarifications about the 7 Hertz figure you have heard associated with Bentov. When Bentov and others write about a resonance near 7 cycles per second, they are not saying your heart will beat 7 times every second. The physiology would not tolerate that. Instead, Bentov used 7 Hz to describe a band in which certain cranial mechanical resonances and some slow cortical rhythms can fall. An oscillatory frequency sometimes noted in EEG bands and in Schumann resonance measurements. In Bentov's framing, the body operates as a system of coupled oscillators. When certain internal oscillations align with environmental fields, he argued, phase relationships can change in ways that correlate with altered subjective experience. In practice, the protocol above seeks to increase coherence among heart, breathing patterns, and cortical rhythms, which can be measured as changes in HRV and EEG coherence. The aim is physiological stability and broadened attention, not reaching a mythical numerical target. Alongside a training protocol, you need detection tools. I mentioned immediate reset sequences earlier, but there are broader signs to watch for and practical countermeasures you can adopt daily. If you find your attention repeatedly hijacked by urgency cues, notifications timed to drum up engagement, rhythmic loops of emotionally charged content, recognize this as engineered rhythm. Put simple guardrails in place. Turn off non-essential notifications, batch your social media use into fixed time blocks, and create content-free periods each day to lower systemic arousal. In environments where you feel manipulated, news cycles that stoke panic, feeds designed to polarize, apply the reset technique and then step away. Take a 20-minute nature walk without your phone, or do a short physical routine that raises your heart rate and breaks entrainment. On the systemic level, defensive strategies include curating your digital diet and practicing algorithmic hygiene. Review app permissions, limit data sharing, and diversify your information sources so that no single filter fully shapes your worldview. The intention here is resilience. A mind with a stable baseline of coherence is harder to nudge persistently. This is empowerment rather than paranoia. There are ethical considerations that cannot be reduced to personal advice. If physiological entrainment techniques become more widely understood, who controls access to the knowledge? Who profits from it? How do we guard against weaponization? These questions are not purely academic. They are the same questions posed by any dual-use technology, from radio to genetic editing. The answer is not simple. It requires transparency in research, robust ethical oversight, and public literacy about basic mechanisms of influence. The hope I want to leave you with is practical. Individual practices that increase embodied coherence can be a form of civic defense. They do not offer invulnerability, but they increase the bandwidth of internal judgment, making it likelier you will notice when external stimuli are trying to hijack your attention. I want to return briefly to the human cost stories that threaded through Bentov's world. People who live in the tales of perception, the ones who describe experiences beyond the normal bell curve, face difficult choices. They may be celebrated by some and pathologized by others. The safest path, from a clinical and social perspective, is integration. Keep your practice connected to community, maintain regular clinical care where needed, and stay anchored in routine activities that support life responsibilities. The goal is not escapist transcendence, it is resilience and an expanded capacity to act in the world. You might still be wondering if Bentov's state is real in the sense that it is measurable and repeatable for some. Doesn't that make a stronger case for institutional interest, perhaps even attempts to suppress? The record around Flight 191 is, and will likely remain, ambiguous. Missing notebooks and untimely death are fertile ground for speculation. They are also, by themselves, not conclusive evidence of foul play. My job as an investigator is to point to the pattern of overlapping inquiries, Bentov's engineering measurements, the Gateway documents protocols, Stargate's mixed results, and modern research into behavioral prediction, and let you see why questions remain. Patterns invite scrutiny. They do not by themselves convict. So what should you take away? First, the phenomenon Bentov measured, physiological coherence tied to subjective shifts in attention, is a plausible and testable claim. He reported instruments and protocols. The gateway documents describe similar practices. Second, the leap from physiological coherence to claims of omniscience or guaranteed psychic abilities is an interpretive step, not an empirical conclusion. Third, the modern data ecology increases the stakes. Timing, platform mechanics, and predictive algorithms create new vectors for large-scale influence. And fourth, the practical steps I outlined, incremental practice, safety safeguards, immediate resets, and algorithmic hygiene, are pragmatic measures you can adopt without accepting metaphysical claims. If you want to pursue this responsibly, keep a few principles in mind. Practice gradually. Keep your life integrated with work, relationships, and care. Keep a log. Consult professionals if troubling symptoms appear. Observe social consequences. If your expanded perspective alienates you from your support network, slow down and prioritize integration. Use discernment when encountering claims of extraordinary abilities. Ask for evidence, seek replication, and demand methodological rigor. There is a final, slightly visionary point I want to underscore. Bentov framed his curiosity in terms that appealed to both engineer and poet. Measurement could illuminate mystery. If we pursue that path with humility, we might expand collective resilience. Imagine small communities practicing coherence together, people who return to their neighborhoods calmer, more attentive, better able to hold difficult conversations. That kind of local coherence radiates outward in small, concrete ways. Clearer thinking at town meetings, more compassionate responses in heated online spaces, stronger support networks when crisis hits. This is not a promise of revolution. It is a practical picture of social stabilization through embodied practice. And yet, the paradox remains. Knowledge that can empower also carries a risk of misuse. That is why public oversight, transparent research, and robust ethical debate are necessary. We should study methods that appear to increase coherence and understanding, while being candid about limits and risks. We should protect individual health and agency, and we should resist seductive narratives that trade evidence for drama. Before I close, let me return to the scene that first drew me into this work. A scientist with instruments on a bench, scribbled notebooks, an engineer's curiosity about how the body hums. Bentov's measurements, whether they point to a deeper metaphysical truth or simply illuminate how our physiology modulates attention, deserve careful study. The declassified gateway documents and Project Stargate's mixed ledger show an institutional willingness to investigate. Modern algorithmic capacities show why the stakes are different now. The record around Flight 191 will likely remain a hinge of speculation. The sensible way forward is neither blind distrust nor uncritical acceptance. It is an ethic of curiosity married to skepticism and a practical commitment to safety. If this material moved you or raised questions, I want to know which way you lean. Do you think Flight 191 was an accident that happened to claim the notebooks of a curious engineer? Or do you see a pattern that suggests suppression is plausible? Drop a comment with "not an accident" or "tragic timing" and make your case. I'll be reading. If you want the deeper materials, high-resolution scans of the gateway pages I referenced, annotated excerpts from Bentov's surviving notebooks, and a downloadable conservative version of the practice protocol with safety checkpoints, there's a link to a newsletter and resource pack in the description. I use that list to send long-form materials and source documents to readers who want to dig into the archives themselves. My final note is a small practical encouragement. Experiment slowly, keep your life integrated, and treat the practice as training in attention, not a shortcut to revelation. The promise Bentov offered, an engineer's ladder from the measurable to the mysterious, was never a guarantee. It was an invitation to look more closely at how the machinery of perception can be trained, and to decide, with eyes open, what that training means for individuals and for society.